Good morning to another episode of Mortgage Talk Mondays. I'm your host, Mason Kealy, where we believe that apart from your family, your house and your mortgage are your biggest investments, so it doesn't hurt to know a little bit more and find out some tips and tricks. Today, we're going to talk about pre-constructions. All those new buildings going up, condos and houses. We're going to bring in a very established and well-known realtor, Kevin Alexander from the Chilliwack area, and he's going to talk about the market, how good of an investment he thinks it is right now, the best ways to find those really good pre-constructions. And I'll give you a few tips as well about the mortgage side, getting a mortgage for pre-construction. Should you get a mortgage now? Should you just pay the deposit, and should you wait until it's finished built to get the mortgage? So stay tuned, and we will bring in Kevin, and we'll have a little chat. Kevin, welcome to the show. Thank you very much for making the time to come on.
Hey, thanks for having me.
You're welcome. So one of the things we wanted to talk about today to our viewers was pre-constructions. And I know there's a lot going on in Chilliwack. Like when I drive around, I see the new buildings going up everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And I know pre-constructions, like people buying before it's built, can be a little intimidating to some. So what's some general advice you give to people when they're thinking of kind of going that route instead of buying an already built house?
Well, it's interesting because it's funny because pre-construction has been around for, as long as they've been building houses, basically. And it's interesting because in the east end of the valley, it's only really become kind of the norm in the last 15 years or so. So the consumer is not really used to it. They're getting more and more used to it now that we're seeing buildings go up and them selling out before they even get occupancy, which was not the norm 10 years ago. I mean, you would see brand new finished units sitting there ready for occupancy. I remember just 5 years ago, I was selling houses that were finished and ready to go brand new. And that's very unusual now. So it does take a bit of the consumer kind of learning how that process works. It can be fairly stressful. Home you're going to be living in for 5, 10, 15, 20 years and not really knowing the process looks like. That said, the consumer is getting used to it now. I think that most people now are able to look at something and see the finishings of a show home and be able to walk through. I think the process of being able to prepare, 1, 2, 3 years in advance can be challenging for a lot of consumers. Just because, you buy a house now, it's not gonna be ready for 2 years. A lot can change in 2 years, right? So I think a lot of people just doing the research is very important. Is this something that's going to work for you long term? Are you willing to, for example, what I often say to consumers when they're buying, say, for example, a condo, they say, well, I only need a 1-bedroom right now. I said, well, it's not going to be ready for 2 years. Are you planning on having kids? Are you planning on, having an office space? And if that's the case, then maybe we should be looking at a 2-bedroom. Or if we're looking at townhouses, maybe looking at a slightly larger one because, if you decide to have kids down the road, the space may be necessary. So it's one of those things where you kind of future-proof yourself. I like to say a lot is, make sure that, either is it rentable? Is it something that, you can grow into rather than grow out of? But as far as buying pre-construction, there's a lot of fear based in it. It's not scary. I think as long as you have the right broker on your side, like yourself, and a realtor that knows what they're talking about, and is advising you to buy in an area that, it's going to be long-term a good investment, then the fear of buying pre-construction is not really necessary.
So I think that's a really good point there, because people are going to be thinking, they're going to say, okay, well, look, you've got all these variables that you just talked about. Like you've got, maybe my family dynamic will change, right? Or maybe my work situation will change, or something's going to change in that like 1 or 2 year period.
Mm-hmm.
So people are going to say, well, why would I even bother? Like, why would I buy a pre-construction and hope everything's going to be good 2 years down the road? Why not just buy something that's ready now?
Right.
So that's kind of where that investment remark comes in, right?
So I often say, when people are looking at pre-construction, obviously there's if you're looking at something new, you're basically looking at pre-construction now. If you're wanting something new, very rarely do I see brand new products sitting there available. And even then, once it's ready, it's gone within a couple of months. It's not like you have this large inventory sitting there just going to waste, basically. And since 2008, basically that's not going to happen ever again, because a lot of the financial side of it, when it comes to the developers building, banks will not lend them money unless the units are sold. So often when it comes to, a larger project, like for example, let's rewind a bit, 2008, you go down to the States, you had, full subdivision sitting there vacant. That doesn't happen anymore, because basically the developer split it into phases, and they will sell a phase out at a time. And that'll be pre-construction generally. And so if they don't have those sold, they just won't build them. So when it comes to the consumer, say, well, why would I buy pre-construction? Well, ultimately the better question is, do you want something new? And if you do,
choice, right?
That's right. So and if you're looking at that from that point of view, I think, like you said, future proofing yourself is fairly important. I think that the investment side of things is important. I also think, when it comes to pre-construction, generally speaking, and this is not a standard thing by any means, so I never tell my clients to rely on it, but generally speaking, when a pre-construction goes up for sale, generally by the time the project is completely built, it's worth at least what you paid for it, and potentially even a bit more. I mean, that's why we saw people flipping them back in 2018. We saw people buying units for $100,000, $200,000 less than current market value, and they would flip them to sell them for more money. I never tell clients to rely on that as an investment strategy, but I think more likely is is this going to work for you a couple years down the road? And if not, like let's say you get transferred for work or something like that, can you rent it? Is it going to be a sellable product? Like if you're buying in a not so great neighborhood that's not rentable, that's a pretty big risk for you, because if you need to 2 years from now, say get transferred for work, you may be losing some money on that if you have to go sell it, because you need to sell it. Whereas if you're buying,
if somebody wants to buy a pre-construction and they do want to, they want to use it as an investment, and like when it's finished, they want to put it on the market and sell it. They're perfectly legal to do that, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, and it's quite common actually. So what'll happen a lot, I mean, I've done this myself a few times in the past few years, is you'll get clients that circumstances change. They bought something a year ago, and one gets pregnant, and they weren't expecting it, or they were one of them gets transferred for work, or he ends up just moving away, and so then you're looking at selling it or renting it, and both of those things. I mean, owning real estate is never a bad decision. So I mean, ultimately, as long as you have your foot in the door and you're comfortable to be able to carry it, there's absolutely no risk in buying pre-construction. I mean, as long as you understand that doing your due diligence up front is very important. And once you've done that due diligence, I mean, ultimately at the end of it, if you end up with a rental, that's a pretty good problem to have.
Yeah. Well, and that's honestly, that's one of the things that I wish people would come to me more about, to ask me those questions. Normally when I'm dealing with pre-constructions, people are coming to me like 2 weeks before it's going to be finished, or a month before it's going to be finished. And they're going to say, okay, hey, now it's up now, and I have to get a mortgage, right? Mm-hmm. And a lot of people don't think they don't think, okay, you know what, I go and I get my mortgage approval and it's good for 120 days or something, right? So they think, okay, if this pre-construction is going to take 2 years to build, I'm going to have to wait until that couple months before to get my mortgage all in order, right? And I wish that myth wasn't out there, because there's so many more advantages to actually getting that mortgage approval in place, right? Like in the 2 years out, right? So, I mean, like one of the big advantages that I see is, well, I mean, and I can only speak for RBC, but I know other banks do things differently. A lot of the times, if you get approved, like when you're looking at a pre-construction and you're 2 years out, you're taking a snapshot of your financial situation at that time, right? And a lot of the times, if you get approved, then you're approved all the way to the 2 years. Like they're not gonna take your credit, right? They're not gonna look at your financial situation down the road at that time. So as you said, who knows what can happen in 2 years? Like you could lose your job, you could have triplets, right? Like anything could happen that your financial situation could go, whoa, maybe we shouldn't have made that investment. Mm-hmm. But the nice thing is, if you get approved up front, you're approved. Like, it's just as long as it was a good approval, you're approved right to the end to purchase. You're not going to be reevaluated again. As I said, different institutions do it differently, right? Another huge advantage too is you never know when life's going to happen, right? Like 2 years can be a long time, right? And one of the nice things is, with RBC, if you get insurance, like mortgage life protection, the worst thing that I hate seeing is, maybe a couple gets a pre-construction and it's 2 years down the road, and then one of the partners dies. And then you've got the other partner that now has that 2 years or less to be able to do that mortgage on their own when it's coming due, because they're going to scramble and they're going to find someone a couple months out. And then they're going to say, well, you know what, I can't afford it now. I can't get the mortgage, but they've already put down a substantial deposit, right? So now they're looking at losing that deposit. Where with RBC, if they get life insurance, the beautiful part of it is you don't start paying for the life insurance until you start making your mortgage payments. So you don't start paying for it until 2 years down the road. But if you do have a life event with a partner, what happens is the life insurance kicks in and starts as soon as the mortgage is funded. So what happens is if two people went in on a mortgage, they got the life insurance, and they waited the 2 years, and in that point, somebody died, what would happen is the pre-construction would finish building, the bank would fund the mortgage, and then the insurance company would immediately pay out the mortgage. So you'd have that one survivor who's already going through a lot. Now you'd have them with a condo with no mortgage, assuming that the coverage, wasn't over like $750,000, right?
That's right.
But it saves them from having to backpedal and scramble, going, oh no, I can't afford the mortgage now, right? Because it's only one income, and those are the worst situations that you can see, right? But
I think it's interesting. Yeah, to that point, I think the biggest mistake I see people making when it comes to pre-construction is the thought process that, we'll worry about it in 2 years.
Yeah, because you never know what's going to be happening in 2 years, right?
Well, the thing that people don't understand, and I think this is something that people really do need to understand, is the fact that when you sign off on a contract, when you're signing off on a purchase of a pre-construction, you put down your deposit, you are in a binding contract at that point. You are going to buy that unit, and there are legal ramifications for that contract. So understanding that when you sign that contract, if the developer's having a bad day and you can't complete, losing your deposit is your best case scenario. Because if for some reason something were to go sideways and the market were to level out and say the price you paid was a little bit more, he could sue you for damages and for carrying it and for all the things that come along with that. And that's not a scary process if you've done your due diligence. I mean, this is the thing. If you talk to say, for example, yourself, you get that financing lined up, then what happens over the next 2 years doesn't really matter because you've already got that in your back pocket. Now, you can decide, 2 years from now, if things change and the market's gone up, you could sell it then, totally fine. It doesn't matter if you have the financing or not. But the thing that's important to know is that if you did not do that thing to begin with, losing your deposit could be your best case scenario. And I know for myself, there's some projects right now, they're taking, 5, 10, 15% of the purchase price. If you're buying a $500,000 townhouse, which is, entry level now for townhouses in Chilliwack and Abbotsford, that's a good chunk of money to just kind of kiss away. So the fact is that knowing upfront to make sure that you've done your due diligence on the financing side, because often that's the biggest concern is that, have you made sure that you can actually afford to buy this thing if, 2 years from now things come together. And I know there's a lot of people that have the wishful thinking thought, and that is, I'm sure we'll make more money over the next 2 years.
But what if you make less? That's the thing, right? And the nice thing about getting pre-approved ahead of time is, coming to either of us ahead of time, for one, you can kind of get all their ducks in a row. And
That's right.
really, it's important for people to understand that idea of the contract, right? And how that contract's going to work, how the deposit works, and the stages that it follows. And then on my side, really understanding, the snapshot of your life right now could be completely different than it is in 2 years. So on our side, I can prepare them, explain how the insurance works, right? And also tell them, look, maybe maybe you can qualify right now, but what if you don't qualify in 2 years? Right? Like, qualify now, get it done. Like, I'm not even joking. You could lose your job and the bank will still give you the mortgage. They're not even going to look when that funding happens. And then at least you're not getting hit by the developer with any sort of ramifications. Maybe at that point in time, you can go and say, okay, you know what? I've got the mortgage on my own now. Maybe, maybe friends and family can help or something, right? But
or even just renting it, for example. Let's say the numbers don't work on paper, you can rent it out and just say that covers everything.
Exactly. But at least you're still qualified. And it's also, I guess it could be another situation too. Like, maybe right now you don't qualify, but you think maybe in a year you will. It's a gamble, right? Because you're putting the deposit down, hoping that you're going to qualify. I don't normally recommend people to gamble with that amount of money, right? But
no, generally now when the deposits are so large, it is and we're talking, I mean, you're literally buying a lottery ticket, basically. You're hoping that things are going to go your way. And you know what, I will say this, I mean, I have done well over 200 pre-sales. On those 200 pre-sales, I was the listing agent on about 180 of them. And I think on those, very rarely do people not complete, but they also value, like, they were lucky because the market had gone up. That's not always going to be the case. I mean, generally speaking, the Fraser Valley is a very safe place to put your money. It's, a good economy, not a lot of inventory. It's a really, really safe place to put your money. And that's why I always say, like, worst case scenario, you got a rental. And I mean, in this area, we've got a vacancy rate less than 1%. I mean, and rents right now are ridiculous. So, I mean, worst case scenario, you've got that. But I mean, ultimately putting, all your faith in the fact you're going to make more money is not always the best decision. I mean, it's a calculated risk, like you said.
So the key is plan ahead, come to the professionals, talk to a mortgage specialist, talk to a realtor, ask them how you can plan. You got 2 years or 1 year or whatever it is. It's a lot of time, right? So
that's right.
Get it all planned out.
Yeah.
So just the last question I want to ask you, just in closing here, because I know you do a lot of work around Chilliwack and some in Abbotsford and the surrounding areas. What are some hot places right now for pre-construction? I know I drove through the lower promontory area, and there's like tons of construction going on in there. What would you think's a really really hot place?
So, I mean, it really depends on what you're kind of looking for. I mean, Chilliwack and Abbotsford are very unique places. I mean, they've grown exponentially over the last 10 years, especially in the last 5 years, for that matter. There's different areas of each part of Chilliwack and Abbotsford that have something to offer. So obviously, you just brought up the lower promontory area there, the kind of Promontory Road, Thomas location. Right now, there's a massive amount of townhouse, row home, and single family dwelling development there. The two major developments being Base 10 and Iron Horse. Iron Horse is mainly single family and row homes. They offer larger lots, but one thing to clarify, this is all leasehold land. So none of it is freehold. Obviously, that's a whole different conversation. The biggest things is that you're signing a lease for a 99-year. I think it actually on Base 10, I think it's 108 years if I remember correctly. But either way, it's a lease rather than freehold ownership. Obviously, there's a little bit of value add in the price points there, and generally they give you a bit more product. But that's most of Sardis right now, honestly, is lease land development. There is not much going on in the Sardis side when it comes to new development on freehold land, which, I mean, bodes well for anybody that's already in the market right now because the pricing is going absolutely bonkers because of it. There's a little bit of development up on Promontory, but again, Promontory is getting pretty full. There's the Gold Spring Heights development, which will be mainly single family, and those are kind of being sold off right now. If you're looking at kind of freehold, wanting to get into a market that maybe has been a little bit less desirable over the last 5 to 10 years, but has a good trajectory, you could look at downtown core. The Alger brothers did a massive new development down there, and basically are trying to gentrify the downtown core. I think right now with that, it has definitely made the momentum go in the right direction. The city wants to see a lot of development down there, and they are giving lots of money to the developers to build down there. We're seeing a lot of these old, rundown single families bulldozed and replaced with either condo or row homes, townhouses.
Yep.
Not a lot of single family, mainly, attached dwellings. So if you're looking at, an area that you'd want to buy a freehold attached dwelling, like for example, I'm selling a development right now on Spadina. Spadina, they're putting a ton of money in to make it more walkable, right down on down by the old Agri-Fair grounds, as well as you've got Prospera Center there, the hospital, it's
Yep.
walking distance to everything. I mean, those are townhomes. That's called Life at the Landing. It's there's 12 of them, and they're about mid 500s.
Okay.
And you've got, there are options. The thing that's interesting in Chilliwack right now is just there's not a lot of new construction. So if you're looking at getting into the new construction game, there are options. There's just not major developments. I mean, mainly it's leasehold land. Like, for example, Hidden Brook, which is a development out towards Chilliwack Mountain. It's a massive development of single family, townhouses, condos, all on lease land.
Are they generally cheaper, the lease property, the leasehold?
It's interesting about lease land. It's funny. Lease land has, there's definitely a stigma attached to leasehold land, which, valid in certain cases and not valid in other cases. I think that there is a bit of a perception problem towards lease land. But I mean, also there is just a functional thing, and that is it's easier to buy land when it's freehold, and it's easier to sell when it's freehold. And I think we're going to see over the next 10 years that the consumer is going to have to get used to seeing leasehold. Just mainly because there's just not a lot of land to build on that isn't on lease land. They're mainly within the confines of the Chilliwack Abbotsford area. Most of our buildable land left is farmland, and that's all within the agricultural land reserve. So it prevents a lot of construction. So you see a lot of infill, so tearing down older houses, building up newer houses, or row homes, or maybe even some condos. But nothing in the major scale like you would see in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, where you'd see a farm field leveled out, and then you'd build a 200 single family.
Yeah, for sure.
And then when it comes to Abbotsford, I mean, Abbotsford's kind of got a lot of exciting stuff going on there too right now. Again, similar problem to Chilliwack. Not a lot of single family at all. There's a little bit on the east end of Abbotsford and a little bit on the west end of Abbotsford. You've got some really nice townhouse developments like the Cinema District at McCallum. It's a beautiful development. Expensive, but it's their nice product. But
right by the university.
Right by the university, great rental area, great area to live as a commuter, and as well as just being close to town. I mean, you're right there to everything.
Exactly.
And there's some Natura, the condo building in Abbotsford there as well. You've got a couple of cool attached developments, but not a lot in the single family realm. I mean, the days of large scale single family, like I said, they're kind of done. I mean, the developers just don't have the cost of land, and the reward on that land. It just doesn't make sense now at the single family market. So we're seeing a lot of attached and a lot of condos and townhouses, some row homes as well. But I mean, the thing is, if I can just kind of give you the overview of the whole area right now. Abbotsford, Chilliwack, the market is stupidly busy right now. I mean, and part of that has to do with the fact that people have been locked in their homes for 9 months. They realize either that this house is perfect for them, or they realize that this house is not going to work for them long term. And I think as consumers, we're looking for different things, and I think that as you see that pan out over the next few months, I think we're going to continue to see a fairly strong market. I think also the lack of inventory has just been absolutely astonishing. I mean, we have not seen inventory levels this low as long as I can remember. And I mean, I've been in real estate now for coming up on 8 years. I went through the 2015, 2016, 2017 markets, which were super low inventory markets and super high buyer markets. And I mean, we're sitting at less inventory than then. I think if we were not in lockdown right now, it would be even crazier than it already is. So it's one of those things. I think, if you're looking to put your money in the market, I think it's a pretty stable place to put it. I mean, even if you're looking at it from the rental point of view, I mean, the rental market right now is just, I just can't even believe what people are getting for rent right now. And I mean, it's partially because there's just no inventory stock.
And like a friend of mine, Diane, from Quantum Properties, they did like Onyx right over near the Abbotsford Hospital there. A beautiful development. But the property's also closer to the hospitals too. Like you've got a lot of aging seniors that are maybe downsizing from houses. They're looking for condos. So, if you're looking for a rental, proximity to hospitals and whatnot is probably a good thing as well.
That's the thing. I mean, if you've got there's two kind of consumers you can go for. I mean, you can go for the family or say maybe the older clientele. And absolutely, I think right now the thing that's very interesting, and I think this is why it's very important to speak to somebody like yourself, is that the people that are renting right now have never been better than they ever have before. I mean, you have doctors renting now that you would never have seen 5 years ago. Just because price points have gotten so high and down payments have gotten so high, it makes it really, really difficult to buy. And that's why you need to have a good broker on your side to get you through that process. But I think that, if somebody's looking at, well, I don't want to own a rental because I don't want to have, somebody that's not going to take care of it. Well, I'll tell you right now, I mean, some of the renters that are out there take better care of their homes than homeowners do, just because they've been used to owning, and honestly, it just becomes the point where people can't afford to buy, and that's where investors or mom and pop investors like you and I buy a house and we rent it out, and it's tremendously attractive. I mean, what other investment can you make where you buy a $700,000 investment and only have to put $150,000 down? I mean, that's a pretty incredible investment, and I think that's something that we're going to see more and more of that, just because the rental pool has become so saturated with good people that they need places to live. So we're going to see
or out of desperation. There's a lot of older couples that have like kids in their 20s that have no prospect at all of getting a place, right? So they're doing refinances and buying condos for their kids. So their kids can just go to university, right, and have a place to live, right, until they're
on. And it's becoming more and more common. I mean, this is something that we would not have seen nearly as much of as we've seen in the last 5 to 10 years. It's something that's the government's done everything they possibly can to kill the market, and it just shows how strong the Fraser Valley market is. I mean, between the foreign buyers tax, the vacancy taxes in Vancouver, the proposition of the lowering of the exemption for capital gains. I mean, they've done everything they possibly can to try to kill the market, and just shows how resilient it is to put your money in a market that's strong. Yeah,
exactly. Well, Kevin, thank you very much for making the time today. I really appreciate it. And I'm going to put your information below, so if anyone needs to reach out to you and they're looking for any ideas on pre-construction, Kevin's the man to go to.
Sounds good. Thanks for talking today.